It's clear as day. The inheritance is going to the eldest son. This will is legit. I hope you're satisfied now. You're doubting it, you damn daughter-in-law.
What? Even though our father-in-law had so much money, is it okay to take it all? My husband looked down on me, while his daughter-in-law rejoiced. The $10 million inheritance from our father will all go to my brother. I stared at the will in despair. Have I lost everything? Bound to this wretched man forever? But with just one sentence from my brother, everything changed. My name is Emily. I'm a 55-year-old housewife. I don't have any children with my husband Liam. We live alone. In one word, my husband is a classic tyrant. Since the beginning of our marriage, I was always expected to obey him. I could never challenge or voice my opinion against him. My husband, who was 10 years older, never showed any consideration for me. I was treated like a servant, harshly insulted if anything displeased him, even after I tried my best doing housework. I was blamed continuously for not being able to bear children. I would often hide and cry. I wanted to divorce him, but I didn't want to worry my family, and I didn't have the financial capability to support myself. Under the tyranny of my arrogant and abusive husband, I clenched my teeth and endured. My only mental support was my father. He was a highly competent businessman. He built a company from scratch and developed it into a large corporation. He was a workaholic, but he loved my brother and me in his own way. After my mother passed away in a car accident shortly after my marriage, he threw himself into his work, even more to suppress his loneliness. Perhaps his overworking led to his downfall. He had a stroke and was taken to the hospital. Fortunately, he survived, but he was left paralyzed on the left side. As a result of working so strenuously, he had accumulated a substantial amount of wealth. I convinced my father to retire. Worried about him living alone, I somehow convinced my husband, and we moved into my father's house. Once a workaholic, he aged dramatically after retirement. He started showing signs of dementia and quickly became bedridden and in need of care. My physical and mental burden increased significantly. In addition to the usual housework and taking care of my husband, I now had to care for my father with dementia. My father would sometimes be quiet, but he would also yell and cause a commotion at night or wander out of the house. I was constantly exhausted from the stress, sleep deprivation, and endless labor. My father was often hazy, but there were moments when he was clear-minded. During those times, we could have peaceful conversations like old times. He would often thank me and say with a sad smile,
I want to leave you as much as I can.
Then my father passed away. It was 3 years after I started caring for him. I was relieved from the burden of care, but losing my only emotional support left me overwhelmed with grief and loneliness. My only hope was my father's inheritance. Even if my brother and I split the $10 million inheritance, it would still be $5 million each. With that money, I could finally get away from that demonic husband. It was the only hope left in my life. A few days later, I was called in by my husband and Natalie, my brother's wife, about the inheritance. My brother, Natalie's husband, had been working abroad alone for several years. He came back temporarily for the funeral, but he returned to his post just yesterday. As a stand-in for the eldest son, his wife Natalie would be attending.
My father-in-law's will has been found deep in a drawer,
he said.
I'm glad it was prepared. The envelope wasn't even sealed, so let's take a look right away.
A will? Did something like that exist? Despite providing daily dedicated care to him, I never saw my father writing a will. I found it peculiar that my husband, who barely got near my father, let alone care for him, knew about this. A feeling of unease rose in me. I had a bad premonition.
All right, I'm going to read it now. All of my assets are to be inherited to my eldest son, Mason. Dated Rewa, day X, month Y. Signed, Steve. That's all.
I couldn't believe my ears. I hadn't always assumed my father's inheritance would be evenly split between my brother and me. The entire inheritance of $10 million would go to my brother? Wait a minute. That's not right. Why? In my confusion, my husband thrust the will towards me.
See for yourself.
Sure enough, it was written just as he said, alongside my father's signature. I immediately suspected that the will was a forgery. My father had a good relationship with both my brother and me, and wasn't the kind of person to favor only one of us. But would my kind and straightforward brother really monopolize the inheritance for himself? While I was pondering in paranoia, the eldest son's wife raised her voice in glee. Wow! Even though father-in-law had so much money, is it really okay to take it all? I feel a bit bad, but if that's his will, we must respect it. This was impossible to accept. While I sat silent, holding the will, my husband and the eldest son's wife glared at me.
Hey, don't tell me you're doubting this. Fine. Then bring in a handwriting expert or whatever. You're just upset because it doesn't work out in your favor. You're such a bad character.
I will do that, I murmured, deciding to request an evaluation of the will, but the results were contrary to my expectation, declaring it was undoubtedly written by the deceased himself. Upon hearing the shocking result, I was crestfallen, recalling the days gone by in sadness. I had dedicated my life to looking after my husband and father, the days of living in fear of my husband's anger, getting hurt by his harsh words, being called a worthless woman, were tough, but my last days with my father were happy, and I had believed that my father truly cared for me. The shock of feeling ignored by my beloved father was unbearable, more so than not receiving the inheritance. I'd probably have to leave the house and land I'm so used to, as they're a part of my father's real estate inheritance. The divorce from my husband that I had dreamt about now seemed like a distant dream. One weekend, I shared the results of the will's evaluation with my husband at home. With a smug look on his face, he laughed at me.
It's clear now. All the inheritance belongs to the eldest son. Don't meddle anymore. You should be satisfied now, since the will was genuine. Distrusting witch.
He sneered before leaving the house. Recently, my husband had been out of the house more frequently. He'd been coming home late from work, and like today, he's often away on his days off. I found it suspicious, but I didn't want to see him more than necessary, so in a way I felt relieved. Though my husband told me not to, I wanted to discuss the matter of the inheritance directly with my brother. My brother, who works overseas, is always busy, but he's a kind and reliable person. After checking with him about his availability, skipping the pleasantries, my older brother apologized for leaving our father's care to me and thanked me for handling the funeral and the various procedures. Don't worry about it. So, about our father's inheritance, was it always decided that you alone would inherit everything? I tried asking in as casual a tone as possible. It was a heart-wrenching thing to think our father might not have loved me, but I wanted to have this conversation.
What? What do you mean? I'm inheriting everything?
My brother was shocked. I had assumed that Natalie had already filled him in, but this was news to him. However, the will was authentic, and the outcome would likely remain the same. I explained the situation to my brother.
I see. So the handwriting on the will was Dad's, and that was the only content. Okay. I need some time to think. I'll get back to you. Don't proceed with the inheritance process until you hear from me. I'll let Natalie know.
With that, my brother hung up. I waited for his call, intrigued by the situation. A few days later, my brother got back to me. He suspected that his wife, Natalie, was up to something and wanted me to hire a private investigator. He also advised me to make a claim for a reserved portion from him. A reserved portion is a part of the inheritance that's guaranteed to the legal heirs, with the amount set according to their position. In my case, I could claim $2.5 million out of my father's $10 million inheritance. Even with the will stating everything will be inherited by my eldest son alone, I would still be able to inherit $2.5 million using this provision. However, my husband and eldest son's wife fiercely opposed this.
We've already settled this. Don't make a fuss now.
But my brother's advice didn't stop there. I'm not asking for $2.5 million. All I want is his house, filled with memories of our father, and the land. The real estate is worth only $1 million out of the total $10 million inheritance. I'll leave the rest to my eldest brother. Despite their objections, I continued. If things get more complicated, my brother has suggested I hire a lawyer to join the discussion. If that happens, I'll end up inheriting the full $2.5 million. My husband and eldest son's wife fell silent. They seemed to realize that settling for the $1 million in real estate was more advantageous. So, we finally reached an agreement on the distribution of the inheritance. A few days later, I received the investigation report on Natalie, which I had commissioned. I immediately contacted my brother. After a series of twists and turns, we successfully completed the procedures for our father's inheritance. My brother, Mason, even flew in from abroad to join the proceedings. I inherited the house and land, worth $1 million, while my older brother inherited the remaining $9 million. Natalie, my brother's wife, and my husband were both thrilled as everything had gone according to their plans. After leaving the lawyer's office, where we had finalized the inheritance proceedings, the four of us returned to our father's house. As we sat in the living room enjoying some tea, my brother put his phone on the table and started talking.
Good job, everyone. Now that the inheritance proceedings are over, I have something to discuss.
With a smile, my brother pulled out a document from his pocket and spread it on the table. My husband and Natalie's faces froze when they saw the contents. Last Will and Testament. That's what the title of the document said. At the end, there was my father's signature and official seal. The date on it was about 5 years ago.
This is the will my father entrusted to me when he was still active. It's a legally valid will, created with 2 witnesses at a notary office.
He explained that our father had drafted it himself before he had a stroke. His wife had already passed away, and he wanted to ensure his children inherited his wealth should anything happen to him. The will specified that Mason, who already had substantial assets, will inherit 1/4 of the estate, and Emily, a homemaker, will inherit 3/4. My father had stated that he had no intention of changing the contents of the will, and had explicitly written,
"If any changes are to be made to this will, the reason for the change must be stated. Any will with changes not accompanied by a reason will be deemed invalid." Father was overworking himself due to his job. I think he considered various possibilities, like falling ill and becoming vegetative or suffering from dementia, because the amount of his assets was enormous. He prepared early to prevent any disputes among the remaining family members after he was gone.
My brother said as he patted the wall. The will had a supplemental section that said,
"I wish for all of you to live happily together, without any conflicts over the inheritance."
It was a will filled with our father's warm feelings for his family. Learning that I, like my brother, had been loved by my father warmed my heart. On the other hand, the faces of my husband and my eldest son's wife sitting next to me had turned pale.
So, if this will is to be changed, it's completely invalid, unless the reason is stated. Even if it is in father's handwriting, he might have been forced to write it when he was in a state of dementia.
Suddenly, my husband slammed the table, looked at my brother with a face like a demon. He growled,
"Mason, do you have any proof? Accusing people of being criminals. I never said Liam forged the will, did I?"
He looked at Natalie, the eldest son's wife, sitting next to him. Natalie remained silent.
It was strange. Natalie informed me about father's death, and I was in Japan until the funeral. After I returned overseas, apparently discussions about the inheritance took place. Despite the matter involving me, there was no communication about it.
He looked at Natalie, his wife. Natalie still said nothing.
"Enough with your nonsense. The inheritance has already been settled. The $9 million is ours. What does it matter now?"
My husband blurted out,
"Who do you mean by us? I am the one who inherited."
My brother responded.
"Enough!"
My husband yelled. The conversation wasn't going anywhere.
I don't quite understand, but the $9 million I inherited is nothing more than a worthless piece of paper.
My brother stated.
Huh?
My husband looked puzzled. My brother explained calmly. Father's $10,000 estate. Other than the real estate, all the assets were stocks in my father's own company. When he was the manager, the company was doing well and the stock prices were soaring. However, after his resignation, the company had been in the red and was on the brink of bankruptcy 3 years before his death. What used to be a wealth valued over $9 million was now nothing more than worthless paper.
There's no way that's possible. It's true. I inherited it, knowing full well I plan to sort out the debts of Father's company from now on.
My husband was agitated, cradling his head and murmuring to himself. He seemed unable to accept the reality that was suddenly before him. This is when Natalie spoke up for the first time. Hold on. Just wait a minute. So what? I inherited trash without knowing it, and Emily alone inherited $1 million? That's not fair. It's unfair. Next to Natalie, who was in a fit of rage, her brother sighed.
Natalie, I inherited my father's estate. It doesn't disadvantage you. Is it something to get so angry about?
But I thought we were going to get the whole $10 million. I was. Natalie, who was flustered and stumbling over her words, was sharply glared at by her husband Liam.
So you conspired with Liam and had an affair because you thought you were going to get all of Dad's money.
Natalie and her husband fell silent as if they were frozen. Why? Why? Natalie murmured in a hoarse voice. Glancing at her, the brother continued. After his phone call with me, he said he began to suspect his wife, Natalie. Why didn't she tell him about the inheritance? Why had her interactions with him become curt recently? And why was she ignoring his messages? As he was suspecting, he saw Natalie's social media post and became convinced of her affair. Soon I'm going to come into a huge amount of money. I'm going to be a celebrity. Darling and I are discussing how to spend it. He said we'll have lots of fun when the money comes in. I'm so happy.
I don't recall having that kind of conversation with you. I wonder who this darling is.
No, that's not it. This is different. Ignoring his flustered wife, the brother took out a large envelope. He pulled out several photos and lined them up next to the will. They showed Natalie and Liam arm in arm, entering a hotel. Close relationship between the two of them was obvious.
I was overseas, you see. I had a detective agency investigate. I was curious about your darling.
Faced with irrefutable evidence, Natalie was trembling, looking at Natalie's adulterous husband. He was boiling with rage, as red as a boiled octopus, in contrast to Natalie, who had turned pale.
Sneaking around like a stalker? What's your game? Bringing out this nonsense, will, and pictures? This is all?
Wait! Suddenly, Natalie raised her voice. She sidled up to her brother with her wheedling voice. You've got it all wrong. It was Liam's doing. He said that if I did as he said, we'd get all of our father-in-law's assets. I was manipulated too. Wouldn't you be happy to get $10 million? I did it for you. Her husband, who'd been betrayed so easily, was gaping at Natalie. These photos. We were just having a little fun. You were always overseas and I was lonely. Can you blame me? You're partly responsible too, right? Please forgive me. We lost the $9 million. But let's take Emily's $1 million worth of real estate.
Did you forge the will?
Huh? Of course not. Liam did it. He said it was easy and made our father-in-law write it. See? I didn't do anything wrong. When the matter of forging the will was also exposed, the husband flew into a rage and lunged at Natalie, but the brother quickly intervened.
You bunch of bastards! You don't have any evidence. I'll make sure all of you regret it in the next life.
With a cool gaze, the brother watched the husband angrily kicking the chairs about. He nonchalantly picked up his phone.
Well, it appears my phone was on recording mode without me noticing. It appears to have been recording since the moment I walked into the house. Quite a careless move on my part.
My husband and Natalie went silent, their faces paling.
Also, didn't mention this earlier, but we have surveillance cameras in this room. They've been recording everything. Installed them because Dad's dementia was severe. We wanted to keep an eye on him just in case. Quite the coincidence, right?
In the quiet living room, the brother continued his monologue.
The forgery of the will. That falls under penal law. Forgery of a document with a seal. Those harsh words you directed at us just now, that's intimidation under penal law. There's a police station nearby. They'd come right away if we called. But, well, the inheritance issue is resolved. And if you swear not to meddle with Emily's share in the future, maybe there's no need to report this. What do you think?
As he spoke, he said,
I'll send this voice recording to my computer abroad. It'd be a shame to waste it.
And began operating his phone. I had been quietly observing their exchange until now, but I pulled out some documents from my bag and thrust them towards my husband. Let's get a divorce right here, right now. I spread out the completed divorce application, a pen, and my husband's personal seal on the table.
Hey, wait. Think about this, all right? I apologize. We've been together for so long. We've had good times, right? Who do you think has been providing for you?
That's enough. Quit your blabbering and sign this. I'll report you. With a fierce expression, I gripped my phone. Resigned, my husband dropped his shoulders and signed the divorce papers.
Natalie, it's over for us too. Once I had the money, you planned to take it and be with Liam, didn't you? I had the detective agency let me listen to the recordings of your conversations with Liam.
Natalie hung her head, covering her face. After that, my brother and I divorced. The husband, after the divorce, left the house. The inheritance he thought he had gained was not only worthless, but he was exposed for the will forgery by Natalie, and everything that happened in the living room was recorded. He must have been boiling with rage, but there was nothing he could do about it. The surveillance camera in the living room was indeed installed for taking care of my father, but it also served the purpose of collecting evidence of my husband's emotional abuse. If my husband refused to divorce after gaining the inheritance, and it caused a dispute, I planned to present it as evidence in the divorce trial. When I discussed this with my brother, he suggested that we could make use of the camera as well. After the divorce, it seems rumors of his affair spread at work, and he lost his place there and resigned. It seems his colleagues saw him entering and exiting a hotel with a family member who wasn't his wife. His parents had already passed away, and now he had lost his home and job. He's nowhere to be found. I had asked for compensation in the divorce trial, but I didn't want anything to do with Liam anymore. And since I had received the inheritance, I didn't care. Natalie, Liam's affair partner, also lost everything because of the incident, just like Liam. Until the end of her divorce with my brother, she persistently pleaded, I don't want to break up. Don't leave me. But the divorce was finalized when irrefutable evidence was presented in mediation. Compensation was also claimed from Natalie in the divorce trial, but she had spent a lot of money while her husband was absent, so that was claimed as well, leaving her completely penniless. Without a job or a home to return to, just like Liam, he seemed to be eking out a living in a rundown public housing unit, subsisting on welfare. My brother is still stationed abroad, and he's put up the house where Natalie and he used to live for sale. He's decided to live with me in the house that our father left us. I was living modestly, but with my brother contributing to living expenses, life has become stable. The value of the land our father left us has been rising annually, and is now easily worth over $10 million. Freed from the duties of caring for my father and enduring my husband's emotional abuse, I am living at ease. Now that I have some time to myself and live alone in this big house, I wondered if there was something useful I could do with it. Around that time, I saw a TV show about exchange students doing home stays and thought, this is it. So I decided to start renting out my spare rooms. Now, I provide affordable rooms to college students and exchange students, and I live a lively life with them. We eat meals together, play games, help with assignments. It's like we're one big, noisy, happy family. On days when I have some spare time, I also volunteer to read children's books at the local public library. I don't have any children of my own, and my heart had drifted apart from my husband. I had always feared how lonely I'd feel if I lost my beloved father on top of all this. But now my days are incredibly lively and filled with vitality. I can't tell you how happy it makes me to connect with young people at this age and feel that I'm contributing even a little to society. There were many times when I wanted to run away from my own life because things got so hard. But now I'm loosely connected with my brother, my roommates, and the people in my community, and I'm living fulfilling days. I savor the simple happiness that I finally attained every single day.